In 1942, Japan's admirals ranked U.S. search planes as little more than a nuisance, mere spotters dismissed by the Imperial Navy's ironclad doctrine of decisive battleship duels and blinding carrier strikes. But while they looked for glory in daylight clashes, the U.S. Navy quietly unleashed the PV-1 Ventura, an unassuming twin-engine patrol bomber that would turn the silence of night into Japan's waking nightmare. What began as an overlooked irritation soon forced convoys to hug coastlines, change routes, and cower in darkness, fueling panic and rewriting every rule they thought kept them safe. This is the shocking truth about what Japan really thought of the PV-1 Ventura, and how the world's most confident navy never saw its own blind spot until it was too late. So why did a plane they barely noticed leave such deep scars on Japan's strategy? And what secret in their own war diaries finally revealed the price of underestimation? In the months before the Pacific War erupted, the Imperial Japanese Navy mapped out every threat they believed could challenge their control of the seas. Battleships and carriers sat at the top of every chart, a world of steel giants and thunderous broadsides, where victory would come from a single, decisive clash. In the war rooms of Tokyo, staff officers traced lines across the Pacific, convinced that their doctrine of Kantai Kessen, the decisive battle, would hold true as it had at Tsushima. Their manuals, revised as late as 1941, spoke of honor, massed surface action, and the primacy of fleet engagements. Every exercise, every war game, every training syllabus reflected this faith. But below the surface of these grand strategies, there was a quiet hierarchy, a pecking order of threats. Submarines were a growing concern, but even their danger was measured against the specter of a decisive fleet action. Search planes, the Sakuteki, were listed on pre-war threat matrices as little more than an inconvenience. They were the eyes, not the fists, of the enemy. In the language of the IJN, Sakuteki meant observation, not combat. Staff planners treated them as a background nuisance, a distraction to be brushed aside by fighters or evaded with a change of course. No one expected a patrol plane to decide the fate of a convoy, let alone a campaign. This confidence was more than arrogance. It was doctrine. Night after night, Japanese naval officers drilled for the moment when their ships would slip through darkness, using centuries of seamanship and the best night vision training in the world. The idea that a twin-engine American patrol bomber could threaten this tradition seemed, at best, a remote possibility. In their war games, the Sakuteki appeared only as a scenario prompt, never as the cause of defeat. Convoy instructions focused on submarine evasion, not aerial harassment. The 1941 charts, still pinned to the walls of staff rooms, placed the patrol plane at the bottom of every threat ladder. This blind spot ran deep. The IJN's culture prized decisive action and visible heroism. Anything less, a slow, grinding war of attrition or the constant irritation of being watched, was dismissed as unworthy of serious consideration. The doctrine was clear: meet the enemy in daylight, strike with overwhelming force, and claim victory in a single, glorious battle. Everything else was background noise. Yet, as the war unfolded, this quiet dismissal would prove to be the first crack in Japan's armor. The Sakuteki, overlooked and underestimated, was about to become the shadow that haunted every convoy. But in 1941, for the men drawing lines on the map, the idea of a patrol bomber rewriting the rules of war was unthinkable. The Japanese Navy's confidence was absolute, and the cost of that certainty had yet to be revealed. American naval strategists looked out at the Pacific and saw not a chessboard for grand battles, but an ocean of targets waiting to be denied. By the early 1940s, the U.S. Navy's thinking had veered off from the Japanese path entirely. Instead of pinning victory on a single clash of titans, American planners began to see the value in constant, grinding pressure, an endless campaign that would wear down Japan's ability to move men and supplies, day or night, storm or sunshine. Patrol bombers, once relegated to the margins, were suddenly at the heart of this new strategy. The PV-1 Ventura was born from this shift, a twin-engine aircraft designed not just to watch, but to strike, to circle the shipping lanes at all hours, and to make the sea itself feel smaller and more dangerous for the enemy. Japanese doctrine, rooted in the spectacle of Tsushima and the writings of Mahan, still clung to the idea of the decisive battle. The Kantai Kessen was more than a plan. It was a worldview. In this world, glory came in broad daylight, with fleets arrayed in perfect order and victory decided in a single afternoon. The idea of a war won by attrition, by the slow squeeze of supply lines, seemed almost dishonorable. American planners, reading the lessons of the Atlantic and watching the slow strangulation of Germany by blockade, saw things differently. They wanted a war of nerves and numbers, a campaign fought not just with battleships, but with aircraft that hunted in the dark, that could strike from beyond the horizon, and that would never let the enemy rest. The Ventura's design reflected this philosophy. Its range, over 1,000 miles, meant it could reach deep into enemy waters, loiter for hours, and return with news or with blood on its hands. The addition of ASD-1 radar turned the night into an ally. For the first time, American crews could find ships in fog or darkness, track them through squalls, and attack when the enemy least expected it. The Japanese had trained their lookouts to see in the dark, but no amount of discipline could spot a Ventura riding the clouds, guided by invisible waves. This was more than a technical leap. It was a cultural one. The U.S. Navy's war games and staff papers from 1942 spoke openly of sea denial, of making every convoy a gamble. Patrol bombers were no longer just scouts. They became the hunters, the disruptors, the reason that Japanese captains checked the sky as often as the sea. American crews learned to fly low, to use the coastline as cover, to attack at dawn or midnight, and to vanish before the enemy could respond. The Japanese, still thinking in terms of duels and daylight, found themselves fighting an enemy who refused to play by the old rules. The clash of philosophies was total. Where Japan saw the patrol plane as a background actor, America made it the star of a new kind of war. The Ventura was not a weapon of spectacle, but of attrition, a tool to grind down the enemy's confidence, to make every voyage a risk, and to turn the open ocean into a trap. As the months wore on, it would become clear that the real battle was not for glory, but for control of the night, the weather, and the endless sea. Night fell over the Sea of Japan, and with it came a new kind of fear. Convoy commanders, once certain that darkness was their shield, began to notice a troubling pattern. Ships vanished from columns without warning. Radio logs from 1943 tell of vessels lost in the black hours before dawn. No torpedo wakes, no submarine periscopes, no surface raiders reported. Lookouts pressed their faces to the salt-streaked glass searching for answers, but the sea gave up nothing except the echo of distant explosions and the sudden absence of running lights. In the logbooks, the explanations grew thin. Presumed torpedo, one entry read, though no one had seen a wake. Another simply recorded, ship missing after 0200, no contact. The usual culprits, American submarines, were nowhere near the scene, their patrol areas logged by Japanese intelligence and cross-checked by nervous staff officers. Yet the losses mounted, always at night, always without warning. Convoy HY-27, steaming south from Moji, lost 2 freighters in a single night. Survivors spoke of flashes in the darkness, the hammering of machine guns, and the roar of engines that faded before anyone could raise the alarm. The next morning, oil slicks and splintered crates marked where the ships had been. No submarine claims matched the timing, and the nearest Allied surface group was hundreds of miles away. The unease crept up the chain of command. In Tokyo, staff officers sifted through radio intercepts and after-action reports, searching for patterns. The same questions surfaced. Why were ships disappearing in weather that should have grounded American bombers? How could attacks come from the empty sky, strike with such precision, and leave so little trace? Convoy commanders began to doubt their charts, their doctrine, even their own senses. Some ordered blackout drills every hour. Others changed course at random intervals, hoping to shake a threat they couldn't see. One captain, after losing a tanker off the coast of Kyushu, wrote in his diary, "No enemy sighted, no warning, only the sea and the dark." By autumn, the fear had become routine. Ships hugged the coast by day, hiding in the shadow of cliffs, then sprinted across open water after sunset, every man on deck straining to hear the approach of engines or the pulse of rockets. The old confidence in night passage had been replaced by a silent, growing anxiety. Every unexplained loss chipped away at the belief that the ocean could be controlled, that darkness still belonged to the Imperial Navy. Without realizing it, Japan's convoy captains were fighting an enemy they couldn't name, one that turned the familiar safety of night into a phantom menace. Radar didn't just give the Ventura an edge, it rewrote the rules of the hunt. A SD-1, the black box crammed into the Ventura's nose, turned the night into the Americans' ally. Operators in cramped, vibrating cabins watched green pulses sweep across a circular screen, searching for the faintest echo. The range, 40 nautical miles. The difference, total. In the Aleutians, where fog blanketed the sea and the sun vanished for weeks, Ventura crews began to find ships that had vanished from every chart. One operator, hunched over his scope, tracked a convoy through sleet and squall, calling out bearings as the pilot banked low over the waves. The Japanese had drilled their lookouts to see through darkness, but no amount of discipline could spot a Ventura riding the radio waves. ASD-1 could pick up a freighter at 20 miles, a surface submarine at 15, and even a lone aircraft at 8. The sky, once a wall of blindness, became a window. The first time a Ventura led a B-24 formation through a weather front, the bomber's crews called it a miracle. The lead ship's radar guided them through clouds thick as soup, right onto the target. Before radar, such a mission would have ended in scattered formations or a cold swim. Now, the mission ended with bombs on deck and a clean escape. Japanese convoy logs began to record strange losses. Ships vanished at night, with no warning, no sighting, no periscope wake. The survivors described flashes in darkness, the hammering of rockets and machine guns, and engines fading before anyone could raise an alarm. No submarine claims matched the timing. The nearest Allied surface group was hundreds of miles away. The only clue, a faint blip on the horizon, gone before dawn. The Ventura's radar didn't just find targets, it let crews attack from any angle, at any hour. With rockets slung under the wings and bombs in the bay, the PV-1 could strike without warning, then disappear into cloud or night. The Japanese, still thinking in terms of daylight duels, found themselves fighting ghosts. Convoy commanders changed course at random, hoping to shake a threat they couldn't see. For the men in the Ventura's belly, the war became a game of patience and nerves. Hours spent staring at the scope, watching for that faint return. When it came, adrenaline surged through the crew. Engines throttled up, the pilot called for silence, and the attack began. A SD-1 didn't just level the playing field, it tilted it. The Japanese had lost the night, and with it, their last refuge. Lieutenant Commander Shisei Yasumoto stood on the bridge and watched the coastline slip past, black against the faint dawn. For years, Japanese captains had trusted the night as their shield, but by 1944, that trust had collapsed. Orders from Tokyo spelled it out. Every convoy crossing the Tsushima Straits would run at night, hugging the land so closely that even the smallest fishing village became a waypoint. The reason was blunt: planes, not the massed bombers of a carrier strike, but the patient, prowling patrol bombers that never seemed to rest. Convoy directives issued that spring left little room for improvisation. Ships were to zigzag on a strict schedule, changing course every 10 to 15 minutes, no matter the weather or fuel state. The patterns were complicated enough to require special training for helmsmen, and every deviation risked a reprimand. But the cost was measured not just in discipline, but in barrels. Fuel consumption soared. By late summer, Japanese fleet staff calculated a 30% increase on routes that should have been routine. Tankers that once made the journey on a single load now arrived running on fumes, and every extra mile meant another risk of being left dead in the water, easy prey for the next attack. The change was visible in the logbooks. Convoys crawling along the coast by day, waiting for darkness to make the dash across open water. Every captain knew the routine: zigzag, blackout, radio silence, and a constant lookout for the faint glimmer of an approaching searchlight. The old confidence in night passage had vanished. Now the night belonged to the enemy. Yasumoto's own reports mentioned course alterations at the first glint of an aircraft, even if it was only a distant speck. Convoys abandoned straight-line routes, adding hours and burning precious reserves, all to avoid a threat that often remained invisible until the attack began. For the men on board, the psychological toll was as real as the physical strain. The constant maneuvering, the sleepless nights, the knowledge that a single mistake could bring rockets or bombs out of the darkness. The phrase that echoed through every after-action review was simple: constant nuisance. By autumn, even the most hardened officers admitted that the patrol planes had forced them into a siege mentality. The doctrine of the offensive was gone. In its place, a daily struggle to survive the night, to slip through the net, and to hope that tomorrow's orders would bring relief. But relief never came. The new doctrine was fear, and it traveled with every convoy, every mile, every hour spent watching the horizon for the ghostly approach of the Ventura. In Tokyo's post-war offices, the reckoning came quietly, not with excuses but with numbers and confessions. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey pressed former Imperial Navy officers for answers, not just about the great battles, but about the quiet, grinding war that had closed Japan's sea lanes. The verdict was blunt. Patrol bombers, once dismissed as background noise, had become the invisible hand tightening the blockade. One official phrase repeated in the survey's transcripts stands out: search planes materially contributed to final destruction. The data behind that admission told its own story. By late 1944, the combined escort fleet had doubled convoy escort assignments, pulling destroyers from offensive duties just to guard merchantmen through the Tsushima Straits. Convoys no longer ran by the clock. Every route was a gamble. every schedule a secret. Japanese fuel consumption on these zigzagging, coastal-hugging runs soared. Internal estimates showed some routes burning 30% more fuel than before. Tankers that once reached port with reserves now arrived on fumes, or not at all. The cost wasn't just in ships lost, but in the ships that never sailed again, stranded for lack of oil. Naval staffers, asked how they tried to cope, described a siege mentality. Orders changed. Night passage became mandatory, even in waters once thought safe. Any sighting of a B-24 or Ventura, B-24 type as their reports called them, meant an immediate course change, no matter the risk or the wasted hours. Escorts fired on shadows, and every merchantman's log filled with nervous notations. Aircraft sighted, altered course. The war diary of one convoy captain in late 1944 records 3 diversions in a single night, each burning precious fuel and pushing his ships closer to empty. The psychological toll ran deep. Officers spoke of a constant nuisance that wore down crews, eroded confidence, and forced them to plan every mile around the possibility of a sudden attack from the dark. The doctrine of decisive battle had given way to a doctrine of avoidance. By the end, the best the Navy could promise was survival, not victory. In the final interviews, even the most senior staff conceded that the American patrol bombers had done what no fleet action could. They had made the sea itself feel foreign, and every journey a risk. The quiet revolution of the PV-1 Ventura had rewritten the rules, and Japan's wartime planners, at last, had no choice but to acknowledge it. By 1945, Japanese Navy interrogation reports confirmed that convoy routes were forced into night-only passages, with transit times increasing by over 30% due to the constant threat from aircraft like the PV-1 Ventura. The USSBS documents revealed direct admissions from commanders, stating that these search planes materially contributed to final destruction of Japan's wartime shipping. Yet, not all details are fully known. Some tactical directives and internal communications remain classified, and the full extent of the psychological toll on Japanese crews is still debated among historians. What is clear from declassified squadron logs and Japanese testimonies is that a weapon once dismissed as a nuisance became a decisive instrument of air-sea blockade. The PV-1 Ventura's legacy endures in modern maritime patrol doctrine, proving that technological adaptation and underestimated threats can reshape entire wars. As Lieutenant Commander Yasumoto summed up, "We came to fear the night and the planes we once ignored."